All right. Welcome, everybody. I am going to attempt to share my screen and pray that technology works for me. I've had my computer decided to take a very long union negotiated break that I was unprepared for. So my computer is working me over today. So hopefully I am sharing the main slide. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you're here. We are going to talk about changing your desire for the foods that are making you sick. Um, Before we get started, I want to make sure that one, you all know who I am. If this is your first time to one of these, welcome. I'm glad you found your way. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. So if you've never been to one of my webinars, there is a Q&A box. You are more than welcome to click on it if you have any questions, or more importantly, when I ask a question about kind of where you're struggling with this, really that Q&A box is a great place for you to share that with me. I would love it if everybody popped in there and told me where you're coming in from, what side of the country, what part of the country you're in. Let me know who you are. In the Q&A box, I should be the only one that's able to see that. So if you pop that information there, I would love to see that. And then again, any answers to the questions that I ask as we go through this information, but also any questions that you really have about the information can go in there also. I'm hoping there's going to be enough time at the end of the information that I have to present that if you need any help, want any coaching, any of that, that is available to you. So again, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Delane Vaughn. I'm a board certified family practice doctor. I am a certified life and weight coach. I help women with type 2 diabetes reverse their diabetes, come off their meds, and live naturally healthy lives. That is what I'm passionate about. Hopefully that's something you're interested in, because that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Before we get started, I do want to remind everybody, if you are on medications for your type 2 diabetes, understand that you have been medicated because of a way that you were eating. The main strategies that I teach for people to reverse their type 2 diabetes includes changing the way that they eat. And if you change the way that you eat and you're medicated before because of the way that you eat, you will need different medications in that situation as you change the way that you eat. And you can get very, very sick if you are not in good contact. You don't have a great line of communication with your medical providers. You can call them and say, hey, my blood sugar is getting low. What do you want me to do with my meds? You really need to have an open line of communication open with your medical provider to make sure that you don't take meds and make these dietary changes and get yourself into a pickle and get quite sick. You can get quite sick with that. So please make sure you have a conversation with your doctor and find out how they want you to communicate with them so you can do that in a safe way as you're making these dietary changes. So we are going to talk about the foods. We are going to talk a lot today about the foods that you keep going back to, even when you know that they make you sick with type 2 diabetes. For me, the foods that I went to were M&Ms and candies like Twix bars or Snickers bars. I would always eat the small ones because I believed that the small ones were not a full one, even if you ate 10 of them. So it was fine. But those were the kinds of foods. It was the candies, the chocolates, chocolate chip cookies, and then my precious Diet Coke. They also kept me quite sick with type 2 diabetes. For other folks, it might be nachos or chips, or it might be their regular sodas. It might be, French fries, pizzas, those kinds of things. Other people struggle with things like donuts or muffins or scones or chocolate milks or the Frappapapas from Starbucks. Others, really want the breads. They like the sourdough breads, the nice breads. They like the pastas, the tortillas, the rice. And then there are other people who just like all of them. They like all of the foods. I see you. I know you. You are my people. I get it. So I want you to think about what the foods are. That's one of those things I want you to pop into the Q&A box. What are the foods that really keep you compelled to eat them, even when you know that they're making you sick? And then I want you to think about those foods, whatever it might be. For me, again, it was M&Ms. For me, what I believed caused my desire for M&Ms, I believed it was the M&Ms. Some women will point out things like situations they find themselves in, right? Like, I'm stressed out at work. I have a huge workload. I'm bored watching TV. I got in an argument with a coworker. I got in a disagreement with a loved one, and I want all the foods because of that. And they believe that that is what drives the desire. For me, it was always, I thought that it was the food. Okay. Both of these things are thoughts. So we're going to come back around to that. Neither of these things are, it is not the situation at work and it is not the food that causes your desire. For me, I truly did believe it was the food. I believe that if we could make apples be as tasty as like chocolate or make pizza be as healthy as lettuce, then I wouldn't be in trouble. Because for me, the idea of fighting and changing the desire for the food was so far outside of my realm of possibility. I thought that the food caused the desire the same way gravity holds me to the ground. I really thought they were like, it was concrete. This is just the way it is. I thought that my love for chocolate was a natural law, the same way gravity is a natural law. And it took a coach to point out to me that my desire for chocolate was a choice made in my thoughts. It was optional. It was not the food. It wasn't the situation. It wasn't my workload. It was the things I thought about the M&Ms that created the desire for it. And once I had that realization and I could see that for what it was, the reality that it was, that was very life-changing for me. I was choosing to have thoughts that created desire in my body, the feeling of desire in my body. The solution that we frequently think we need is cutting out the food, right? Like changing the food, like I mean, it's so funny. We joke about it. Like, I need to move to a deserted island somewhere far, far away where I don't ever have access to X food. We believe that changing the food is the answer. Now, there is a physiologic response to these highly processed foods, right? And remembering the majority of the American diet is not really food that we would ever find in nature. And so the physiologic response that occurs, and I'm going to dive into this a little deeper here in a little bit, but the physiological response that occurs when we eat these foods means that we get a huge surge of dopamine. And that huge surge of dopamine means we desire that food a lot. We like want to repeat. We are heavily motivated to repeat eating that food. That's how it works. That's a physiologic response in our body and our brain. But recognize the belief is what actually drives the desire for the specific food. Because whether you're eating 75 grams of carbohydrates in the form of bread or pasta or chocolate or hot tamales or sweet tarts or donuts, pick your poison, friends, no matter what it is. The 75 grams of carbohydrate is what binds to the receptor in our brain and gives you a huge surge of dopamine, right? It's also what creates an insulin surge, and that's creating your type 2 diabetes. It does not matter whether it's a muffin or whether it's pasta. It's the amount of carbohydrates. Your desire for a muffin over pasta has to do with you, not with the biology occurring in your body, okay? If you think about, again, like there is not a natural source of a huge surge of carbohydrates like that. 75 grams of carbohydrates in one sitting does not usually occur in nature. Do we have honey? Yes. And there's like 300 grams of carbohydrates, I think, in like a cup of honey. It's insane. And honey is protected by little stinging creatures that will attack you if you try to get to the honey. Like that's how rare and hard in nature it is to get to that food. Okay. Same thing with like maple syrup. I think there's 200 grams of carbohydrates in a cup of maple syrup, but it's not like it's everywhere and available all the time, right? So if you think about foods that are not natural, like sodas and breads and those sorts of things. So for like a 12-ounce can of Dr. Pepper, there's 38 grams of carbohydrates in that one 12-ounce can. To get 38 grams of carbohydrates in a natural food like carrots, I mean, you have to eat a pound of carrots. And even when that happens, because the carbohydrate in the natural food is bound up to the fiber in the natural food, the way that your body absorbs it and the way that it gets released to and like able to interact with the brain is very differently than the way it happens when you're drinking a can of soda. Okay. So there is this dopamine surge that we have, and that is physiologic. But the reason you desire X food over a different food over Y food is you. That's a unique thought that you have. It is not the biology of what's going on. So the solution is not to change the food, is what I want to offer you. That is not where we need to pour our energy. The solution is to change our beliefs about it, right? There is never going to be an alternate universe where our brain does not have this huge dopamine surge in response to chocolate or bread or pizza. It's just not a reality that we get to exist in. It's like fighting gravity. Okay. So the solution is not changing the food. You can keep working at that, but it's going to be a fail every time because you can't change the way your biology responds to that food. So let's talk about what desire actually is. Like sitting and thinking about desire. What is it? Where does it come from? How do I have agency over it? So the first thing I always work with my clients on when we're processing, when we're learning to feel the desire for something, we recognize one, that desire is a feeling. So for me, I'm trying to think of a food. Scones are a great example for me. Carol, I see that you're on here and I know you talk about scones sometime. So scones is a great example. I have never been drawn to scones. They're just not my thing. Maybe muffins, but hands down, any day I would give up every muffin, all the muffins, all the scones, all the baked goods, maybe not donuts, but probably even donuts for a bag of refrigerated Twix bars. Like that would be my go-to. That or maybe chocolate truffles, or the other one that I really like is like refrigerated or freezer stored Reese's peanut butter cups. Those are my favorites. Those are the things that I love. For me, when I feel my dogs are barking, I forgot to mention that my dogs are here. There's one, there's two others over there, and there's a dying poinsettia over there. So if you don't see the color, it's because it's dead. I really probably ought to get rid of that thing. But there's dogs barking in the neighborhood, and my dogs might hear them and lose their marbles. So I apologize if they get loud. So when you're thinking of those foods, and then the feeling that comes over you. So if it's scones, if it's M&Ms, what is the feeling that comes over you? Describing how it feels. Like, how does it feel? Where do I feel it in my body? For me, when I feel desire, it's always at the base of my throat and it radiates kind of up into my neck. The words that I would use to describe it is typically hot and heavy, and then not strong like hard rubber is kind of how it would feel. Like I've spent enough time with desire in my body that I have a pretty good idea of what it feels like. The color I typically give to it is a dark red. It's hot in temperature. I can give the feeling of desire in my body all of these characteristics because I've spent some time with it. But then thinking about, where does it come from? The biology is not what creates that feeling, right? That's not what happens. Biology will create like this dopamine surge, like that's happening when you go to eat it or when you do eat it. And because when you did eat it last time, you got a huge dopamine surge. Now, when you feel that desire, your brain is heavily motivating you through this effect of dopamine in your brain to repeat the action that got the dopamine surge. Okay. This is what they call it an addictive like circuit in our brain. And it truly is. It's the same thing that works with cigarettes and heroin and cocaine. It's like the same way that it works. You get this huge surge of dopamine when you do those drugs. That means whenever you have the feeling that you had right before doing those drugs, you're heavily motivated the next time you have that feeling to repeat the action, which is doing the drug. Same thing with the food. If you're feeling intense desire, and every time you meet that intense desire, that redness in your throat that radiates up to your, into your neck, and it's hot, and it's all, whenever you're feeling that feeling, and you have met it with a huge dopamine surge, Every time that you have that feeling, you are going to be heavily motivated to repeat that behavior. That's the effect of dopamine. But what actually starts the desire for the food, that comes from me. That comes from my brain. That comes from my thoughts, right? Thoughts of, I love M&Ms. They're my favorite. They're little power pellets. They're so good. They're crunchy on the outside and smooth chocolate on the inside. All of these thoughts create that desire in me. Things like just one more would be the most. I want them. All of those thoughts create that bubbling into this base of my neck, base of my throat, into my neck and my throat, the heat, the heaviness, the intensity that comes with it. It does not come from the existence of M&Ms. And the way that you can be sure this is true is because if I saw a pack of cigarettes or heroin, I don't even know what heroin looks like, but maybe I saw a morphine, which is, the medical version of heroin, right? If I saw a morphine tube, and I have used morphine when I've been post-op from surgeries, right? Like I've had morphine, but I don't have the desire and then using the morphine to create that dopamine surge, right? Like that's why. It is the lack of the thought that, God, I want the morphine, that keeps that desire from building there, right? The same thing with cigarettes. I have absolutely no desire for cigarettes. Like that's not something that creates desire in me. The stuff that happens in my brain, the neurochemistry is the same regardless, right? For me, scones don't do the same thing, even though it's the same amount of carbohydrates. That the grams of carbohydrates I would be eating with a scone can be equalized to the grams of carbohydrates I would be eating with M&Ms. Scones are not compelling to me. They do not appeal to me. Okay. It is the belief that I have about those things that create the desire. Okay. And that's where this is so important to see. The thoughts are what are causing our feeling of desire. And then look at what we're doing. What are we actually doing? What's the action we're taking? What are we experiencing and doing when we have the feeling of desire in our body? We start scheming and making plans. We start judging ourselves because we shouldn't be scheming and making plans because we shouldn't even want the food. We know it makes us sick. I promised myself I wasn't going to do that. I shouldn't eat it. And then we start bargaining, but just one won't hurt. A little bit is way better than what I used to eat. I'll start again tomorrow. And then we give in. We go against ourselves, against our better judgment. And then we end up with regret and guilt and shame. Okay. Those are the things that we do from that space of desire. We eat the food. Again, it starts with this thought process of scheming and judging and bargaining that leads to the action of putting the food into our mouth. And then what we get is this regret and this shame and this guilt that comes with it. So in that last step that I talked about, where's the food in all of that? Where's the food and the scheming and the bargaining and the giving in and, the guilt and all of that? The food is not in that at all. When I mentioned before that this food is not natural to the human being, it always brings me to this dopamine cycle. And this is kind of what we're talking about. Yes, there is this physiologic response of dopamine in your brain that occurs when we eat these foods. And a lot of people will be like, oh, it's just not my fault. The dopamine thing happens. But again, I want to remind you that the dopamine happens with all of the food. All of the processed foods happen. Yes, with processed foods, you get a much more intense, concentrated release of dopamine into your system. That's real. But the dopamine happens regardless. Your desire for the food happens because of your thoughts about the food. And I want to make sure that that's separated, because really where you have the most agency, you're never going to shut your brain off from producing dopamine to those foods. That's not a reality. You don't have agency over that. What you do have agency over is what you believe about that food. And that's where the fix is. So the dopamine cycle, if you take naturally occurring foods, so you can see this, the green circle off to the, I hope it's off to your, it should be off to your left on your screen. Naturally occurring foods, when we eat them, we get a natural surge of dopamine, a dopamine response into our brain. That dopamine response, again, affects the brain in a way that it motivates or emphasizes the importance of that experience in your life, right? In a natural situation, these dopamine surges occur with things that propagate us as a species, that propagate our survival, okay? Consuming food propagates our survival. We've got to do it, right? So you got this dopamine surge. When you get this dopamine surge, you get this natural emphasis. You have a natural desire for that food. You remember that it grows behind that tree by that rock in the summer. Go get some so you don't starve to death in the winter. You remember those things. You have a natural desire for that food. You eat it in a natural way and you get the same response over again. You get a natural dopamine surge. You get this emphasis on the food. You get a natural desire for the food and you eat it. It's this lovely little cycle. However, when we concentrate the food, when we process the foods that cause the problem, right? Nobody got diabetic because of their strawberry problem, right? That's not where we got here. It is the Snickers, the Twix, the M&Ms, the sodas, the Frappi Chappas, the scones, the muffins, the pizza, the chips, all of those things. Those are the things that when we eat those foods are not naturally available to the human being, kind of like I talked about a little bit ago, right? Like honey's out there and it's super carby, like a huge surge of carbohydrates in one cup, but it's guarded by stinging bees, right? And it's not always available to us. Same thing with maple syrup. M&Ms are always available to us. Always. I can go get a bag right now. I can get a bag. I can get a mini bag. I can get a share bag. I can get a pound bag. I can get a 2-pound bag. I can get plain M&Ms. I can get peanut M&Ms. I can get peanut butter M&Ms. I can get mint M&Ms. I can get cookies and cream M&Ms. You can get all the M&Ms. I can get almond M&Ms. You can get all the M&Ms you want. They're unlimitedly available to us right now. Okay. So unlike nature that doesn't make these foods that will make us sick available to us unlimitedly, we have started producing food in an artificial way that makes it always available to us and gives us a concentrated release of dopamine into our brain. So you take natural foods and we process it and we artificially concentrate the carbohydrate component of it. That carbohydrate component, when we eat it, gives a concentrated release of dopamine into our brain. That then causes, you can see, oh, I don't know if it'll, yeah, here we go. You can see where the brain then overemphasizes the importance of that food specifically. It's not like all food's important. Go out and find yourself some celery. No, 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 no. M&Ms are important. It will emphasize, it will cause you to, your brain will overemphasize the importance of that food, which creates over desire for the food. This is where you're getting into that desire component, right? Your brain will start to motivate you to eat that food again and again and again. And then you overeat the food. And then when you overeat the food, now you're overeating food that has already caused an over release of dopamine. So you're getting even more dopamine. Instead of getting a nice cycle here, you end up in this snowball effect where it really gets away from you. Okay. So there is this effect of dopamine and it is important. But the reason that we continue to choose the food has to do with our belief about the food and to see that is really important. Again, this cycle here also happens with heroin and cocaine and cigarettes and alcohol and methamphetamines and all sorts of things. But I doubt that if you're in this discussion right now, that those are compelling to you. The reason that the food that makes you sick is compelling to you is because you have beliefs about them. And unpacking those beliefs is where you change the desire for that food. So the struggle, of course, becomes when we recognize that we have this desire, we judge ourselves for the desire because it's wrong and that's what makes it so hard. Then we fight it like, I shouldn't feel the desire. How do I avoid the experience of having the desire? We run from anything that might create the desire, like don't go by the break room, don't go to that part of the grocery store, change the way that you walk so you don't have to go to buy that baker, right? Like change everything about you because we can't possibly experience the desire. Because why? Because people like me believe that the desire is just like gravity. I can't fight it. It's a law of nature, right? We run from the desire, and that is what is exhausting to us. That's what creates women just throwing in the towel and being like, I'm done with this. We have questions like, why do I have to feel this way? It's constant fight. It'd be so much easier if I just didn't feel this way. Why can't we make apples as tasty as chocolate, right? Why can't pizza be as healthy as lettuce, right? Why can't I change that so I don't have to change my thought? This is where in the group we use a concept called the thought model. It's a tool that I use. We have circumstances, we have beliefs about our circumstances. Those beliefs and thoughts create our feelings. Those feelings drive our actions, and our actions give us our results. So what we've been dealing with is I have M&Ms, and my thought was, oh my God, they're my favorite. I love them so much. I wish I could have them all the time. I love them. These were just just a handful of thoughts that I would have that created the feeling of desire. I love them so much. They're the best. I want them. That, I mean, like, think about it right now as I want them. Think of your food, whatever it was, think of your food and think about what the thought you have about that food. I want them. They're my favorite. And that creates a desire. If your brain automatically goes to, I know I shouldn't want them, underneath that thought that you are really trying to force into your brain, that probably creates like this battle and this fight and this struggle and this exhaustion, underneath that is the fact that you want the stuff, right? Like, you're not having to sit there going, oh my God, I shouldn't want heroin, right? Like, we don't have to think that because we don't want it, right? But what we do want are the M&Ms, right? Like, for me, that was, and still to this day, I wish I loved something as much as I loved M&Ms and Diet Coke. Maybe I love my kids as much, but like, I'll tell you, they don't give me a surge of dopamine like those things did, right? So, of course, like, my brain knows that I still love that. Like, yeah, of course, they're tasty. They're absolutely tasty. They're so good. It does not create the desire in me anymore, but then it did. It definitely created the desire. So think to yourself, you think about your food, why do you desire it? Answer that question. That's going to give you the thought that you have. The feeling that we deal with is desire. The action, like we talked about, goes through this process of like ruminating in our desire. Like, why do I have to have this desire? I wish I didn't have this desire, right? Like the judgment that we talked about, the bargaining that we talked about. And then, of course, the throwing in the towel and eating the thing, and the shame and the guilt, right? And our result is when we eat the food, you get a dopamine surge into your brain that makes you desire the food all the time. It's your favorite. You want it all the time. You love it. You create that result because we start with the thought, oh my God, I love that food. Okay. So think about the feelings that you're having. Like, think about what you have been feeling, but then think about how you actually want to feel in the presence of those foods. Do you want to, again, put those things in the chat? Like, what is the feeling that you think you could have that would keep you from eating those foods? So maybe you want to feel neutral about it. Maybe you don't want to feel compelled by the foods. Like, you just want to feel like, oh, they exist, unfazed by it. Maybe you want to feel aloof, right? Like, I mean, I know it exists. I just don't care that it exists. Or sometimes you want to feel empowered. Like, I want to feel empowered. Like, I want to feel some energized part of me to not eat the foods. And then think about what you already believe about those foods that you know you eat and create diabetes in your body. Think about them right now. You already believe something about those foods other than they're tasty and good and you love them so much, or you wouldn't be wanting to figure out how to not eat them. So what do you already believe about these foods that make you want to stop eating them? Why do you not want to eat these foods? These thoughts already exist in your head. You're just busy spending time with, oh my God, I love them. They're so tasty. They're my favorite. You're spending so much time with those thoughts that you're never hearing these other thoughts, but they exist or you wouldn't want to stop eating those foods. So sometimes these thoughts look like, I know that makes me sick. That was a big one for me. Like, that's why I don't eat M&Ms and Diet Coke anymore. It's not because they don't taste good. They totally taste good. It's because I know they make me sick. Not only do they create insulin resistance in my body, but all of the additives in it actually make my stomach upset. I feel horrible when I eat those foods, and I know that for a fact. Okay. So reminding, like, why is it that you don't want to eat them? It may be, I know these cause diabetes. It may be as simple as, I know these foods cause diabetes, or I know in the morning my blood sugar is going to be high. That's a good one, Fatima, right? Like, I know that if I eat these foods today, I'm going to see a negative outcome, or I'm not going to see the gains that I want, right? Like I want my A1C to keep dropping. And today, this decision right here is going to slow that process for me. That's a fact, right? Like those are the reasons you don't want to eat those foods. So when you're trying to figure out the thoughts that you already have them in there. We won't be talking about this, right? Like you want to be on this call. When you're trying to figure out the thoughts that you have that can create neutrality about M&Ms or pizza or whatever it is, that can create being unfazed or aloofness or even empowered, right? Like what thoughts do you already have about these foods that create them? For me, something that would create empowered is I know when I don't eat those foods, I feel amazing. And it's true. Like I do know that. And I do think that that creates empowered. That for me creates the empowerment to not eat the foods that make me sick. Okay. Then you look at the results that you're creating when you do that, right? When you think of candies, and my brain likes candies, and my brain immediately goes to, I totally want those foods, but I know that they make me sick. And when I have the thought, oh my God, I love M&Ms, but I know they make me sick, it feels very neutral for me. It's like, I don't love that they make me sick, but I certainly don't want to eat them anymore. It doesn't create this desire that drives me to the food, right? When I am feeling that neutrality, just that, oh, of course. I mean, it's just like reporting whether there's a cloud in the sky. Like sometimes clouds are in the sky, right? Like this is just a neutral experience. My brain likes M&Ms, but my belly doesn't. And that neutrality, from that neutral space, what do you find that you do? You're probably not planning and scheming and judging and bargaining and giving in and then guilting and shaming and regretting, right? What do you find that you do? For me, when I'm feeling that, oh, there's M&Ms there. I do this. I always use donuts as an example because, of course, every break room in America has no less than 4 boxes of donuts, I guess. But donuts are pretty common, right? Like they're always around. So when I see donuts, like I think they're the coolest thing ever. They do the most clever things with donuts ever. This is something that when I ate a lot of donuts was not something that I like. They didn't put Twix bars on donuts when I was 7 years old, right? So when I walk by donuts, I'm like, those things are the coolest things ever. Those things look so clever. They are colorful. They look really delicious. Oh my gosh, they put, peanut butter cups and they crushed them up and they put them on a donut. That's brilliant. And my brain totally is like, yeah, that would taste delicious. I bet that's really, really good. But that's not the only part I hear. I also hear, yeah, and I would feel horrible if I ate that food. If I ate that, I would feel horrible. There are things in that food that doesn't fuel my cells well. It actually makes my cells sick, just the additives in there. It's just not something I'm interested in. From that neutral space, sometimes it's empowered, and a lot of times it's just aloof. A lot of times it's entertained because I'm like, man, those things are clever, but it's not desire. From that aloof, neutral, not compelled to eat something that makes me sick space, I find that I just go about doing the things that I need to get done, right? I'm not planning and scheming and judging and bargaining and doing all of those things. Instead, I'm like, yeah, donuts look cool. Hey guys, there's donuts in there. They're the coolest things ever. And I'm back doing the things that I need to be doing. I'm doing the tasks I want to complete. I'm starting something that I want to get done. When I feel empowered, or when you feel empowered or aloof or neutral about these foods that are making you sick, what do you find that you're doing? Because that creates the results that you're wanting to create in your life, right? If, oh my God, I love M&Ms is creating your result of having a high blood sugar, think about what that food makes me sick. Like, I know it's not good for me and I'm not going to eat that. Creating you not eating the food, what is that creating for you? That's going to create the health that you want. And the M&Ms never have to change. The food never has to change. It can be there. And you don't have to manipulate your life to where there are never any foods that make you sick available to you. When you start to see what else is true about that food for you and start to spend time with those thoughts, that is the fix, the key to resolving your desire for foods that make you sick. Okay. So I am going to check I'm going to put this up just in case anybody isn't aware of how to get a hold of me. You can always send any questions to me at Delane@DelaneMD.com. If you're unaware, there's a podcast and I go into all sorts of things, everything from the science behind insulin resistance. I talk about meds. I talk about all the things on my podcast, but it's Reversing Diabetes with Delane MD. You can find that on all your podcast players. And then you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook. Yes, Fatima, I absolutely embrace the feeling of, or the thought, like even the desire. I don't want to, I've gotten to this point where I'm like, I don't even know that I don't want to feel desire for it. Like, desire is kind of fun to feel and want when I know that it's not compelling me to do something behind my back, right? When I'm not only hearing the desire. So we do this all the time, guys, with all sorts of other things. Like we do this all the time with like money. Like I have the desire to buy a new pair of shoes, but I know if I do that, I'm not going to have the money to pay my bills. So you make a decision, right? The food thing, and Fatima, I know that you and I over the years have discussed this, but we have a belief in our head that a little bit's okay. And if you are insulin resistant, my friend, a little bit is not okay. And you know that because you see it whenever your biology isn't working correctly. That belief, a little bit's okay, keeps you stuck. And that's where it goes back to, this is a thought thing. That's why I spend so much time with my clients talking about the things that they think and the things that they feel. A lot of times they're like, no, I just need somebody to wire my jaw shut. And I'm like, no, you don't need anybody to wire your jaw shut. You need to stop only believing one thing about the food that is making you sick. You need to stop believing that a little bit of the food that makes you sick is okay, because it's not. I've been likening this lately to a cigarette smoker who has lung cancer or COPD, like lung disease, emphysema, right? There is no alternate universe where a doctor is going to say, oh, it's okay, keep smoking. We'll just give you more inhalers. That's not a reality. The doctor will always say you have to stop smoking because it damages your lungs. You have to stop the food that damages your cells and keeps you sick. That is the fix. That's the only fix. Now, once your lungs are healthy, although most of the time, if you get to a point where you have COPD, your lungs will never get back to a place where they're healthy. But for somebody who starts with healthy lungs, they can smoke a cigarette, and one cigarette is probably not going to be what does them in. But once you're already to a place where you're diseased, one cigarette's too many. Same thing. If you're starting from a place where your cells are not insulin resistant, one M&M, a bag of M&Ms, a pound of M&Ms is probably not going to be the problem. But if you're already at a place where you're insulin resistant, yes, all of that food is a problem. And that's the part that our medical society, me, my people, are probably not doing a great job of explaining to people. Yeah, we actually have to cut that food out. And learning that food just does not really align with our biology. All of these are thoughts, guys, that I'm offering you. They are thoughts that you can take or leave. If they feel true, if they resonate with you, please surf them as long as you can. Ride it as long as you can. Because that's what it's always is, right? Like it's always a thought. The reason that you prefer X food and I prefer Y food has nothing to do with the food, and it has nothing to do with our unique biologies. It has to do with our thoughts about it. That's all. Okay. Learning to believe something else about the food is the key to behaving in a different way. Carol, still struggling with strong desire for donuts. You mentioned practicing and not indulging, still struggling with this, inconsistent in my ability to refrain from it. Yeah. And that's going to be, it is a practice. And we've talked about this, Carol. I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but the understanding that we build beliefs the same way, literally the same proteins that are used in our muscle cells are used in our brain cells as we connect neurons to have different beliefs. One bicep curl does not create a bicep muscle. It doesn't get you the results that you want. You have to do the bicep curl over and over and over and over and over again. You have to think the thought over and over and over and over and over again. That's what will get you there. So, okay, guys, if you have any questions, put them in the question and answer. I'm checking, make sure there's nothing in the chat. There is not. I hope you guys have found it helpful and found this information useful. Is it possible to reverse insulin resistance? If so, then are those treats occasionally okay? Yeah, this is definitely something that is unique and to like your biology, right? Yes, it is absolutely. I wholly believe that it is absolutely possible to reverse insulin resistance. There are some conditions that make it take longer, fine. But what I always try to offer folks to help them build the belief that that's possible is if we lived in a world where there was no processed foods, do you believe that your diabetes would reverse? And if the answer is yes, that you believe that, then yes, it is possible for you because there's absolutely no requirement of those foods in your human body. In fact, it's no requirement, kind of like cigarettes. There's no requirement for cigarettes in the human being either, right? They actually are making you sick. They're not doing anything for you. So, if you believe that yes, if there were no processed foods, if I got stranded on a deserted island and all there was coconuts, bananas, and fish, would that make you diabetic? No, that wouldn't make you diabetic. And you would eat in a way that your insulin resistance would reverse, and you would reverse your insulin resistance and your diabetes that way. So your question is it after that reverse happens, is it okay to occasionally have foods? I definitely do that. Yesterday was Valentine's Day and I had sweets. I had ice cream. I had ice cream. I did have ice cream. It wasn't the one that I wanted, but I did have ice cream. So yeah, I do that. And I do that not rarely. I mean, it's probably a few times a month that I will eat something. My A1C has been less than 5 for the last 3 or 4 years, 3.5 years. The last one I did, my labs are right here. I haven't posted them on Instagram yet because my A1C, like there's the heading, but my A1C results on the next page. But it is 4.7. My insulin was undetectable and it has been for the last few years. My markers, my triglycerides are always less than 50. My ALT is less than 10. My numbers are always, my biomarkers are always what we know, at least the information that we have. My biomarkers support that I don't have insulin resistance happening in my body, even though a few times a month I will have something that's would cause a high surge of insulin in my body. Okay. I'm like, maybe today, I haven't tested today. I'm just getting over COVID again. Seems to be a regular thing for me in February. I get the Rona. Last year when I got COVID, I did have a couple of blood sugar readings that were over 200. It was very shocking to me. They were right after a meal, and the meal was a banana and honey and raisins. So it wasn't even like it was wedding cake or something crazy, but my after a meal blood sugar immediately after the meal did pop up to 220, which by definition is diabetic. If like any random blood sugar above like 180 is considered diabetic if you talk to the doctors. If you looked at my A1C, that was in the beginning of February. My A1C last year I took in the middle of March and my A1C was still 4.8. So my, again, my insulin was still undetectable. So, I mean, like, yeah, like sometimes biology is just what biology is. And in the realm of COVID, like our bodies do strange things, and that's fine. I don't think it was necessarily insulin resistance I was seeing, or at least not insulin resistance that was caused by the food that I eat. So, and I guess that was a long roundabout way to answer your question, but yes, you can reverse. It is possible to reverse the insulin resistance. And once that has happened and your cells are functioning normally, yes, it is okay to occasionally have those treats. But recognize as you start to reverse your insulin resistance and start to make these better dietary habits, it's what I call collecting better biology. Okay. So if you've been insulin resistant for the last decade, and suddenly you make a bunch of changes and over the next 3 years you reverse your insulin resistance, you've collected 3 years of normal cells behaving normally versus the 10 years that you had of them behaving abnormally. So it is possible that people see them kind of ride this fence of going back into insulin resistance, and they start to see those numbers rise high. When you see that, it just means you haven't collected enough better biology. Like we're trying to get too many treats in our life, and that is causing us to kind of ride the fence between insulin resistance and being normal, our cells being functioning normally. So I hope that answers your question. I do feel like that was a really long roundabout way. I hope that was helpful. Better biology does happening. Yes, it does, Fatima. Yes, it does. Absolutely. So anybody needs anything else? If not, I'm gonna sign off. We 45 minutes or so. This is gonna be recorded, and hopefully I can get it. I mean, it is recorded, and I'm hoping to post it on YouTube. So if you want to watch it on the replay, you can do that. If you want to tell your friends, have them go to my YouTube channel, Delane MD. Thanks again, Mom, for giving me a squirrely name that nobody else has, because I can put Delane MD on all the things. So Delane MD on Facebook, Delane MD on Instagram, Delane MD on YouTube. You can find the Delane MD channel, and that's where all the podcasts are being posted and recorded. And that's where this will also be posted. So, all right, guys, I hope you have a great week, and I will talk with you next time. If you have any questions, reach out to me, Delane at DelaneMD.com. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.